I am here with Jeff Alani Stanfill. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me on for the third time. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm very happy to have you here, particularly because this is something pretty major. You and I kind of embarked on something, I think, a year ago.
Yeah.
And you came to me and said you wanted to do a course.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, I'll give you my best advice, but it's going to be a lot of work. And sure enough, you went and did the work. So you have released a course. Give us the title.
It is called Teaching the Contemporary Commercial Music Tenor.
Beautiful. So Contemporary Commercial Music Tenor.
Yes.
What is it that sets that voice apart? Why were you led to create a course specifically for this voice?
Well, I'm a tenor myself, and I struggled so much with all of the sundry problems that are associated with tenors. Overcompression of the breath, over-adduction of the vocal folds, pushing too much air pressure through to try to, hit the notes, singing with the unnaturally high larynx, squeezing of the laryngeal muscles, neck tightness, locking of the solar plexus. I think those are all really common issues that I see in my tenor students. So I wanted to create a course that could help tenors sort of navigate all of that. And, even though this course is geared towards contemporary commercial music tenors, it's great for all tenors regardless of, the type of music. But I wanted it to be, not so classical in the approach, so that it's more about singing contemporary pop music. And I have this awesome tenor that I teach in the course. His name is Jonathan Hoyle. He was on the master class I taught for IVTOM a couple of years ago for Leggero tenor. And he's actually moved into more of a lyric tenor category. His voice has really filled out a lot. And so those were some of the issues that I thought was very necessary to cover, because I think the tenor voice is the most difficult to train, most difficult to train, and it's the most difficult to be. So I told you all the stuff that I suffered from the beginning. It took me a long time to learn not to take in so much air, because I think when we get up to those G's, A flats, A's and B flats, and B's and C's, I know for me, I tended to take so much air, and then, those little tiny vocal folds can't hold back all that air pressure. So I had to learn how to manage the air pressure, and that was something that took a long time to learn. And then as soon as I kind of mastered that, then I was like, okay, I really want to teach this and share this with other tenors. Those are some of the things that I really wanted to focus on. And the course goes through posture alignment. One of the things that I noticed, I did this master class with David Phelps, and one of the things that I noticed immediately about him is that he has this really tall, noble posture. And that guy can sing pretty much anything. But when he walks in a room, he's tall. Like you're tall. He's tall, but he carries himself with this very noble posture. And so when I started looking at all the great pop tenors like Adam Lambert, even Steve Perry, who's not very tall, and even Bruno Mars, who's even shorter, they still carry.
I've passed Steve Perry, and this was surreal in the middle of a grocery store.
Oh my gosh.
And it's very bizarre to see a rock superstar schlepping his groceries around in a cart like everyone else.
Oh my God.
But
that would have been very difficult for me not to just go up to him and say, I love you. But
he very quickly, he saw the flash of recognition in my eyes and just turned, and I'm like, I will leave you alone. I will respect your space.
Yeah, so that's something that I really noticed, that all of those tenors I mentioned, they all carried themselves very tall. I mean, if you saw Adam Lambert at the Jubilation concert for the Queen, he just looks so noble, and that really helps with his support and with the way he manages the air pressure. So I really wanted to focus on that in the course, and so I give a lot of exercises and concepts for posture and alignment and air pressure. Those are really important things to cover, and support, and how to support the voice without overblowing the vocal folds, because that's something I really, really suffered from. I always tell my students, John, that everything that they suffered from, I suffered from it 10 times more.
I think that's important. As a teacher, not that all teachers have to have struggled with their voice, but that the student understands your empathy and that you've been there. And there's something, because you're a tenor who struggled, there is something about that voice type, and perhaps you can speak to this, that even just thinking these notes, the body just wants to tense. It's almost like it kicks in a fight or flight, because, and you can see it in some tenors. I would notice that Pavarotti, before he would sing a high note, he would smile. He couldn't wait for it. And then you would see other tenors, and you see this look of fear. Their eyes start darting around like, oh no, here it comes. And so much of that is psychological. Maybe speak to those special challenges.
Yeah, well, a lot of, the tenor personality is very specific. I think most of us tenors tend to be kind of like Maseratis. We rev pretty high. I don't know if that's just because of the type of music we sing, or it's innately part of our DNA. We tend to be high energy people. And so one of the things that I was taught a long time ago, you have those two types of students, the ones you have to plug in and the ones you have to unplug. So most of the tenors I work with unplugging them to get them to just feel a little bit more relaxed in their approach and try to normalize the high notes. That's been my biggest thing, is just teaching them that it's not this way, it's this way. And that really seems to help them understand that there's no reaching. Because I actually did a show one time, and this big producer came backstage. I was so excited to meet him because I thought for sure he was going to offer me a job in his next show. And he comes up to me and he says, "Mr. Stanfill, you'd be so great if you wouldn't reach for those high notes." And I was like, oh my God. So, but he was right. I knew exactly what he was talking about, because I was reaching for everything. So that's some of the things I work on a lot. And in the course, we talk a lot about not reaching, really reducing the amount of air pressure. That's a big thing, is just reducing the air pressure and having strategies and concepts to do it. So every day, and the tenors need things that they can work on. I even have a part in the course, excuse me, I have some allergies, but I have a part of the course where I do planks, and I vocalize doing a plank. So I show them that they should be able to do, even if it's a modified plank, they should be able to do that while they're vocal.
And it would strike me, because I've heard this idea amongst classical voices, and very big voice types, that we've probably never heard some of the great voices that nature has bestowed upon us, because those voices are particularly hard to train. And I would imagine there are amazing tenor voices walking amongst us, and the owners of these voices think they don't have what it takes, or that they can't sing. And it's not. Right. It's actually, they've been given such an amazing gift that it's harder to train.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things for students that I work with is I've noticed that across the board, as soon as they start to get around D, E flat, E, F sharp, the larynx starts to come up. So once I can teach them that the larynx does not need to come up there, and once they can understand that, then they go, oh my gosh, that feels so much better. Because that's what used to happen to me. I would get to, D. As soon as I felt that D, I would feel my larynx come up. And then if it needed to come up later on, it had no room to go up. So that's one of the things I really focus on, is getting them to really understand that pitch change happens at the vocal folds, not at the larynx. And
Well,
I was thinking,
I'm sorry, but I just want to point out something you said that's really important, is that the ability to stabilize the larynx at the D floor for E flat 4 enables you higher up in the register. If the larynx does need to come up, there is room for it to come up, because we don't want to be stuck. It's not about just always being on a low larynx.
no, not at all. But yeah, certainly a more relaxed larynx. So they have more space because, we do need a little more space up there. And I really talk a lot about keeping the space open there. So if there's room for the larynx to go up, it has it. And that's really a big thing. I think that's something that maybe is not taught so much, because I go to a lot of Broadway shows, because I have students in shows, and sometimes I'll see a lot of singers just singing with their larynx so jammed up and it sounds uncomfortable. And I'm like, why are they teaching these singers to have such a high larynx when you hear really great singers like Cynthia Erivo? I mean, she's not a tenor, but you hear someone like her and she's singing with this big open sound that sounds amazing, and she's still able to access that belt up there with a really, slightly more neutral larynx than jammed up in her throat. And so that's sort of my approach with tenors, is just keeping them chilled out a little more so they normalize the high notes. They're not thinking like, here comes the G, here comes the A flat, here comes the A. They're just thinking about it more in line with the compression. And I don't know if we ever talked about this, but I had a roommate in college. He was 6'6". Did I ever tell you about him? He was a roommate, and he was a tenor. He was 6'6", and he had this voice that would just knock you back. You couldn't even be in the same room with him when he sang a high C. It was just huge. And I asked him one time, I said, how do you get so much chest voice up there? And he goes, that's not chest voice, that's head voice. And I said, oh my gosh, that's impossible. That's not head voice. He goes, yeah, that's head voice. And I said, well, what creates that sound that it's chest? He said, it's a compression. So I never heard that word until I started studying with my teacher. And one day he brought it up and he said, we need to work on your compression. I said, yay, finally, someone's going to address this compression thing. So I think that's something that maybe is not talked about enough, but needs to be talked about to find these amazing tenors, because they're out there.
And I think that's an important word, because compression we will often associate with squeeze, and it's not the same thing.
Not at all. It's actually a free throat, but more compression in the abdominals. And it's, for me, I don't know how you think about compression, but I kind of feel like it's almost like an accordion. It's compressed from above and compressed from below. So it's almost like a contraction of the abs. And I don't ever tell my students to contract your abs, because that's not the right approach, but certainly have a little bit more tilting of the hips, so the pelvis is tilted a little bit more under, and that gives them more access to their abs. So then they can start to feel that lined up feeling with the breath and the ring. And that's another thing that I focus a lot on, is building ring in the middle voice. And once they get that ring there, then they can start to carry the ring factor up to the high notes.
And that's essential, because when you start asking them to give up the high larynx and kind of that yell in the voice, the first thing they're going to experience is instability, right?
Right. Oh, yeah.
So by allowing that acoustic tuning and that ring combined with this balanced compression, that becomes the bridge. The yell is easier to find, but it's harder to maintain. This is harder to find, but you can maintain it, your entire singing life.
Yeah. I I sing in an 80s band, and we've never had to drop any of the keys for any of the Journey stuff. And I'm not bragging about this, just like I've maintained my technique even in later years. So I don't want to have to drop the keys because everything feels great now. It feels more manageable because I don't think about the high notes. I think about, okay, I need to breathe. I need to, take the air and do this with the air, and then the sound will come out. Hopefully. It doesn't always come out, we all have those days, but that's the kind of stuff that I try to share with my students and certainly in this course.
So what are some of the big mistakes you see tenors making with their voice beyond just these errors of tension? Are there certain approaches they will try and force on their voice that just aren't beneficial?
For sure. One of the biggest, I talk about this in the PDF. I wrote a whole little PDF booklet that goes along with the course. And, when I did that master class with David Phelps, I had so many tenors approach me. They'd call me up and like, can you help me sound like David Phelps? Can you help me sing like David Phelps? And what I tell them is, you have to sound like yourself because there's only one David Phelps, but there's only one, so-and-so. There's only one of you. So I think the biggest thing is that a lot of tenors have, imposter syndrome. They don't feel like they're good enough with their voice. They don't feel like their voice is big enough or loud enough or whatever. So you have to find like your voice type. I knew after working with David, I knew that my voice wasn't a David Phelps voice. I love to hear him sing, but I'm never going to sound like David Phelps. And I don't really try to sound like Steve Perry. I try to sound like my voice, but whatever, if I'm singing a Journey song, I certainly put the licks in and the style, but I still try to sing with my voice. So I always tell them, always be a first-rate version of yourself, never a second-rate version of someone else, because I think that's the biggest mistake. They try to be someone they're not. And once you can find your original sound, then you can fly.
I find that to be true. I work with somebody who sings for a band that was big in the 70s and 80s, and he's not the original singer. And he doesn't try and force his voice. He kind of just captures the spirit of the original singer with his voice, and it's highly effective. I think when people try and imitate another singer and force it, we often overdo things. I mean, again, that's usually the big problem with singing and in life is we overdo our good intentions. But yeah, your natural voice and just, as you say, capturing the vibe and just learning from other singers, you'll get your version of what Steve Perry has or David Phelps has, but you'll do it in your own way. I think that's where your power is.
Yeah, for sure. I have the guy that's in the chorus, Jonathan Hoyle. He came to me wanting to be another David Phelps. And I said, look, we have to take this really, really slow. And we have to keep your voice on the light side as long as possible. So by doing that, his voice is naturally filling out. It's not something he's doing to it. It's just opening up and it's filling out. And he does have a little echo, I guess, of David Phelps in his voice, but you hear his natural sound. And that's been a really beautiful thing. And I think when you see him work in the exercises in the course, you kind of see how we approach everything very easy, try to make it as efficient as possible. And then the big sound sort of opens up. So that's another thing. It's just taking it really slow. Tenors, like I said, they're like Maseratis. They want to go, 120 miles an hour, and that means they want a fast pace with the progress. But it's a very slow progress to get your amazing tenor voice, or any voice.
That's the thing. We want to rush. We want it all. We want it now. Jeff, how could people find out more about you and your course?
Okay, they can go to voicesoaring.com. That's my website. And they can find me on YouTube as Jeff Alani Stanfill. And I'm also on Instagram and TikTok. I don't go on TikTok as much as I should. But yeah, voicesoaring.com and YouTube for sure.
Very good. Jeff, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, John. It was a pleasure. I really appreciate it.